Hi everyone, this week we have 2 tutorials for each of the recommended software. This is the first for Acid Xpress about balancing, mixing and using automation. The second tutorial is about transposition or pitch shifting. So I'm going to open up a small Acid project I've already created for this tutorial. We're met again with the Show Me How interface here. For the sake of reference, the tutorials that this video will be covering are the How to Fade Audio In and Out tutorial, as well as the How to Use an Audio Envelope tutorial. So we're going to be looking at mixing and balancing and automation. We'll close that. So this is a project here I've made to be able to demonstrate some balancing principles. It's made entirely from the downloadable Acid Loops pack available on Blackboard, with occasional hi-hat samples from the drums pack. I'll be making this project file available for you to tinker with this week, but I'll play through it once now so that you can get familiar with it. So we already saw last week how to arrange loops and samples in Acid Xpress, as well as how to use the project's tempo and key signature to manipulate those loops. And at this stage, we'll be looking to mix or balance the volumes of our layers so that nothing is too loud or too quiet. The most general way to do that in all music making software is to come up here to the track listing on the left and manipulate the volume slider on each track. We can also manipulate the panning of each track, which means the distribution of the audio signal being sent to the left and right channels in a stereo mix. Stereo mix just meaning that there are 2 channels for, say, your left and right ear in a pair of headphones. So naturally, moving to the left is your left ear and to the right is your right ear. So these are the kind of frontline, most general tools that we'll be using to mix initially. To cover some general principles for volume and panning, it's important to understand that balance doesn't necessarily mean that everything is the same volume. What we mean by balance musically is that nothing stands out and overpowers the other instruments or layers in the mix, and similarly that nothing is lost or masked by other layers. Meaning that depending on the original loudness of each loop when it was originally imported, you'll be adjusting each track to a separate volume. So when we try to mix these volumes, an important thing to note is that we generally want to mix down rather than mixing up, meaning that it would be better to bring a loud instrument down to the volume of the other instruments rather than to slowly boost all of the other instruments up. So the reason that this is good practice is it helps us avoid volume creep, meaning that if these drums, for example, were particularly loud and we turned up the bass and guitar to meet them, the next time we thought something was too soft, if we similarly turned that up, we'd eventually run out of headroom here to be able to increase the volume, and it will become very difficult to mix. Meaning that in general, if this drum kit down the bottom were too loud, it would be far better to bring it down to the volume of the others. Of course, we don't only mix down because we'd eventually run out of room and our project would end up quite quiet, but in general, you'll have an easier time mixing as a beginner if you bring loud things down. As for panning, we don't necessarily turn instruments to the full left or the full right side, meaning that we'd only hear it out of either the left or right ear exclusively. What we generally use panning for is to fan out the instruments slightly to the left and right of the mix, to open it up, provide a bit more clarity to each instrumental part, and give the mix a sense of stereo space. So one typical example for this instrument setup might be the drums in the center, the bass slightly to the right, and the guitar slightly to the left. This could be reversed, of course, but we'll generally be spacing out the instruments to provide a little clarity. Great, so those are our first general tools for mixing, affecting the entire track at once. The other useful tool to know about that affects the entire track are the mute and solo functions, and these are incredibly useful when we're trying to mix. So in Acid Xpress, they're represented up here in the top right corner of each track by an exclamation point for solo and a cancel button for mute. As you can imagine, the effect of mute, if we toggle it on, is that the track will be silent. As you can see, it's now grayed out, allowing us to focus on the balance between the other instruments within our mix. So if I play from here, You'll notice that we can no longer hear the guitar. The inverse of this, if we toggle mute back off, is that we can solo the track, meaning that we only hear the guitar, allowing us to focus on particularities of the layer, such as its timing or its tone if we're trying to apply different audio effects, without the interference of other instruments. So each of these two functions, solo and mute, can be applied to multiple tracks at once. We may, for example, want to listen to only the guitar and the bass, so we'll solo them both. And listen. And of course, the same effect could be achieved by muting the drum track. And again, these are really useful tools for when you want to hone in on particular details of balance between tracks or features within an individual layer. So after we start to set our sort of general volumes and panning, there are also a few intelligent ways that we can alter those parameters throughout our project at specific points in the piece. And these sorts of techniques fall under the bracket of automation, meaning that we program an automatic command for the volume to change at, say, bar 17, or for the panning to change, or for some sort of effect, or even the tempo to change. So in Acid Xpress, automation is referred to as envelopes, such that each track can have an envelope for a parameter, such as volume or panning, programmed onto it, and it will read that data during playback and alter the relevant parameter. So to access these envelopes, we can select a track, say the guitar, we'll come up to Insert, scroll down to Envelopes, and then we're given the option of creating either a volume or a panning envelope. So we'll start with a volume envelope, and as you'll see now, there's been a graph drawn on the guitar track. This graph is representative of the volume of the track over time. So there's some points already drawn here. We can drag those up and down to change the volume graph, down being quieter, up being louder. You can also see the volume value represented in the pop-up text. And we can also double click somewhere on that graph to draw additional points, allowing us to create a volume curve for the duration of our piece. The purpose of this, of course, is that you may want to lower the volume of a particularly loud loop or vice versa, as well as to action different effects, say like a fade in or a fade out at relevant points in your music. So I'll make some more data closer together and then we'll have a listen so that you can hear. So we could hear the audio rising and falling with that graph. The shortcut to quickly apply this to any track with the track selected is to just press V on the keyboard. You'll see a new graph and you can double click to draw new data points. So here's a quick demonstration on the drum kit. Great, so if I just double click each of those points to level that data out. Alternatively, if you want to delete points, we can right click and then go reset all. They'll all disappear for that track. And I'll just quickly do the same to the guitar track. But yes, the other envelope we have available to us is panning. So again, we could come up to Insert, Envelopes and select Panning, or alternatively, with this track selected, we can simply select P. This red graph is to show that it's a different parameter being manipulated so you don't get them confused. And the only difference in its function, we still double click for data points, is that dragging upwards is panning to the left, while dragging down is panning to the right. So generally we don't automate panning as often as we automate volume in trying to balance a project, but we can use panning automation for some creative effects. So for example, you may want the drums to sound as if they're changing ear each bar. So we'll drag one point down here to the right, add another data point, and drag it up to the left, and so on. Let's have a listen. Great, so each of these envelopes allow us to automate parameters like volume and panning throughout our piece at specific points. But Acid Xpress also has another alternative for quick volume edits or other functions like fading in and out if we don't want to open up this full envelope. So I'll clear all the data by right-clicking and hitting Reset All. I'll press P to toggle off the panning envelope, and similarly I'll press V to toggle off the volume envelope. And now I'll zoom in just a little more for some extra detail. So what we can do to each individual region in our project, if we'd like to quickly make a fade in or out of that loop, or drag down the general volume of the loop, is to come to the top right or top left corner. Your cursor should turn into a curved shape when you're in the correct position. And when you drag inward from this side, you'll see a volume curve. And what this is directly representative of is the volume of the selected loop. meaning that this loop will fade out as it approaches the end. So similarly, we can drag in from the top left to create a fade in. I'll use the drum track down here to demonstrate the fade in, as the guitar has quite infrequent notes and it may be difficult to hear. So we'll play that bar. We could hear that the drum slowly entered rather than the hard start that was initially there. So this can be useful for when a layer enters or exits, but keep in mind that fading in or out isn't always more effective than hard entrances. It all depends on the creative context. So the other quick volume alteration we can make is that if we drag from the top of a selected loop, you'll see a pointer with an arrow to the bottom right. If we drag down with that cursor, you'll be changing the volume for just that loop segment without needing to go and draw an entire volume envelope. So I'll drag that down. You can hear that that was very quiet. And similarly, if I drag it back up. And again, these are little quick tools to allow you to edit individual segments without having to go and draw a full envelope. While we're zoomed into this detail, it's also worth demonstrating for anyone unfamiliar that we can drag the left and right side in general, so not the top right or left corner where we have the fade cursor, but just from the left border, to quickly edit a loop, say we wanted it to only last for half as long. So with that covered, one last thing to address is how we can change the tempo at a particular point within our piece. So if I zoom back out for now, presuming that we're happy with the original 120 beats per minute tempo of this piece, we may want to slow down the ending in some way. So we'll select the point that we want to insert a tempo change, say here at the ending at bar 37. Then we simply come up to Insert, Tempo Key or Time Signature Change. You'll be shown this interface here. As you can see, Acid Xpress also makes it very easy to change the time signature or the key of your project at any given point, all in this same dialog. So we'll uncheck key for now as we only want to change the tempo. And we may slow this down to something like 90. So let's have a listen. And of course, we can use that to speed up different sections, slow down different sections. And again, if you're creative, feel free to experiment with changing the time signature or the key throughout the project. So that should provide you with the basics of balancing, mixing, and automation in Acid Xpress. For a creative exercise this week, I would encourage everybody to begin their first assessment and try to apply some of these principles as they go. So try to use some different envelopes, try to balance the volumes and the panning to explore the different ways that it can affect your music. But if you've yet to begin, I'll also be making this project here available for you to download and have a tinker with as some practice for balancing and mixing. Further, if you're a beginner or feeling intimidated still by working in this software, you can feel free to download this project and have a dig through some of the different ways that I've cut up or arranged these loops, which are again all from the Acid Loops folder available on Blackboard. As always, feel free to direct any questions or difficulties to the discussion forums or the Collaborate session each week, and I'll see you in the second tutorial. Thanks.